Good morning here from beautiful sunny St. Augustine, Florida and Flagler College. My name is Dr. Leslee Keys. I am an assistant professor in history in the Department of Humanities, and I also had the historic preservation responsibilities for the campus. As you can see by the cover slide, I have a whole variety of additional titles. If you are interested in any of that, just lets you know that I have been doing historic preservation for a very long time. That is the emphasis of my history background. I've also been researching Flagler College and Henry Flagler for more than 20 years. So we're going to take you on a little tour of our campus. Pathways to Preservation is our strategic plan theme for this year. And so this fits in well with that. I hope you will agree. In 2018, Flagler College celebrated its 50th anniversary, which means it was founded in 1968, a rather unusual time to found a private college or any higher educational institution at that time, in that the 1960s was in the midst of the Vietnam War. It was also in the midst of urban renewal and cities were being revitalized, hence the historic preservation component, student demonstrations, Martin Luther King's assassination, which was commemorated a few days ago, the 53rd anniversary of that, and Robert Francis Kennedy's assassination was also in the summer of 1968. But Flagler College was begun by, as an effort to secure preservation for the Hotel Ponce de Leon, which is pictured in the upper left on the screen. This was Henry Flagler's first hotel here in St. Augustine, and it is immediately to the west of the colonial downtown, about 4 blocks from the waterway, the Intracoastal Waterway and the Matanzas River. So it is in the heart and soul of the city. I'm going to use my cursor as a pointer. In the center here, we have a photograph portrait of Henry Flagler that he presented to Dr. Andrew Anderson. It is located in one of the parlors at Markland House. The Hotel Ponce de Leon and Markland House were the 2 properties that began as the college campus, much smaller than today. Also on the right-hand side, we have Abear Hall and the Florida East Coast Railway buildings. That sort of forms the west end of our campus. So we have about a half a mile long campus, as it were, with a neighborhood in between. The FEC buildings are the representation of St. Augustine's only national corporate headquarters. If you want more information about this program, or the Ponce, as the building has fondly been called throughout its history, Hotel Ponce de Leon, the book cover is up here in the upper right. And yes, I wrote that. It is the preservation story for the college campus. I'm going to continue to go clockwise through the black and white photographs. So lower right is an image. These are all from the Library of Congress. And this is the dining room or dining hall. Students these days call it D Hall, since we abbreviate everything. But it's a very glamorous, gorgeous, exotic place to wine and dine and socialize. The rotunda or the lobby is the small vertical picture here, which has some remarkable images and murals that were done by the same artist that replicated a set of them 10 years later for the Library of Congress. Again, another historic photograph from the Library of Congress is our grand parlor, what we refer to now as the Flagler Room. And we do have a number of the original furnishings in there. As part of the tour that we give through the Flagler's Legacy Tour program, you would see all of these spaces. And then a historic photograph from when the Ponce opened, and you can see lots of palm trees, and note that it's not much different from that historic photograph. But to get to that college and from the hotel chapter, we go through a different chapter in United States and St. Augustine history. And we talk about a little bit about the Great Depression, which did close down much of St. Augustine. Florida was actually the hardest hit of all of the United States in the Depression, and St. Augustine almost filed bankruptcy. Key West already had. So there was an effort to figure out a way to focus tourism back on Florida, but particularly back on St. Augustine. As that was started in the 1930s and throughout the 1930s and partially successful, the United States ended up in World War II after Pearl Harbor was attacked on December 7th of 1941. The founding headquarters of the Coast Guard Reserve became the site of the Hotel Ponce de Leon. Here is the Coast Guard Training Center. To the left, we also had the spars, or the women's arm of that Coast Guard Reserve. The logo for the Coast Guard is here, and on the other logo that you can see of the Florida East Coast Railway. So you still had those two entities paralleling throughout this time frame. A couple of other historic images, and I won't go clockwise on these, but I'll go left to right. In the midst of World War II, in 1944, St. Augustine had a hurricane. It was actually called the Great Atlantic Hurricane of 1944. And the troops went out in their nice big fat tire trucks through the wet streets and rescued the citizens and a few pets and brought them back into the hotel, which meant that the soldiers bunked even more doubly on the upper floors so that the evacuated residents could have the lower floors of what had been the hotel rooms. Babe Diedrichson Zaharias, still considered one of the greatest athletes of all time, played golf here in St. Augustine. She came each winter for a number of years and had been diagnosed with cancer. So she spent the last several of her winters of her life enjoying time here at the Ponce and in St. Augustine. And another fun, sort of silly photograph is 1951. This is the courtyard of the Hotel Ponce de Leon. And yes, that is snow. So lest you think we don't have snow here in Florida, we do on rare occasions get that northern weather. Here's the beginning of our legacy with Lawrence Lewis Jr., Henry Flagler's grandnephew, and the first Flagler College president, Roy Carlson. Lewis had grown up here as a child, playing in the hotel, running through the hallways, and he really wanted to figure out a way to save his great uncle's flagship hotel. That is what began the college, with an arrangement from a family from Massachusetts who had Mount Ida College, and Flagler was going to be the sister college to that. This is opening day, and again, Mr. Carlson and 3 of the women students, an all-women's college initially. It didn't quite work out, so they reprogrammed the institution 3 years later into a co-ed institution. So here is a courtyard image with some of our early men and women students. And in case you are not familiar with Henry Flagler, this is an image of Mr. Flagler late in life. He was a founding partner with John D. Rockefeller and William Rockefeller brothers in Standard Oil. They founded it in Cleveland, Ohio, and about a decade later, in the late 1870s, they moved to New York. They were so successful that by 1882, Flagler could participate in the Plant Investment Company with Henry Plant and 9 other businessmen from New York and New England to develop the southernmost frontier of the United States, which we know as Florida from Orlando south. Again, left to right on the bottom line, Dr. William L. Proctor, the president who was brought in 1971, hired in April. His first hire was Dr. William T. Hebert Jr. as the admissions director. The 2 Bills, as they are fondly known, are still alive and well and participated in the life of the college until just recently, which is a remarkable situation on any college campus. Today, they are also recognized with naming of buildings on the campus. Dr. Proctor was honored by the trustees and the Keenan Trust after his 25th year as president with the Proctor Library. Dr. Hebert Hall, the residence hall that is with the FEC buildings, recognizes his tenure here. An early classroom so that you can see, pretty typical at the time, nothing flashy. Basically, they took what had been buildings, rooms in the hotel, the staff building, and turned those into classrooms. And our early cross-country team, if you are a Flagler alum from a long time ago, you will recognize at least a couple of these people. On the left, we have Dan Stewart, who went on to become an administrator at the college, and Mitch Walk, who was our Alumni Association president for a long time and serves on the board of trustees. And then Henry Flagler's statue had been down at the railroad station near the Florida East Coast Railway buildings. That moved to City Hall, but Lawrence Lewis decided it was most appropriate across the street as the welcoming statue for the new Flagler College. So that is where Henry stands to this day, and students pose for pictures with him, especially at graduation. Here's part of the preservation story, and this goes back to half a century ago. You have the building recognized at its opening as the most luxurious resort in the world. What a status. But young architects, John Mervyn Carrera and Thomas Hastings, who were 26 and 25 years old respectively, had just graduated from the École des Beaux-Arts in Paris. And Henry Flagler was related to and familiar with the Hastings family. He hires them, gives them their first commission, tells them he wants to have them design a little hotel. Well, perhaps not quite so little, but they certainly did do the design. They also collectively enlisted Thomas Edison to do the electricity and the power plant, and Louis Comfort Tiffany to do the interior decoration, and our 79 stained glass windows, the largest collection in the world. The building also had running water, heat, steam heat, and Otis elevators. Now, Edison and Tiffany and Flagler had all been to St. Augustine prior to the time of the construction, so they knew what the city was like. Small Spanish town that has quite a European flavor and still continues to this day to do that. A little subliminal reinforcement of Flagler College is on the images that I have included in the slides. Each time that you see a version of the logo, it's the logo that was used at the time that relates to the slide itself. So the early days, we have our rampant lion. In 1957, the Ponce received its first recognition as one of the 100 most important buildings in the United States on the centennial of the founding of the American Institute of Architects. Went on from there in the 1970s to be listed in the National Register and to receive an early historic preservation grant matched by the Arthur Vining Davis Foundations, which happens to be located in Jacksonville, but does a great amount of work throughout the United States. That was fairly significant because that was trusting this tiny college that had only been operating for a decade with some significant funding to preserve the campus. As you can see, we fast forward a few decades to 2006 when the building becomes a National Historic Landmark. This is the highest status that a building in the United States can receive. It is a designation through the United States Department of the Interior, and there are fewer than 3,000 buildings in the United States that have that status. In 2010, the American Institute's chapter here in Florida also recognized Flagler College and the Ponce as one of the most important buildings in Florida. And then you can see the bottom line here. The college has received 25 historic preservation awards. I can't verify that that's more than any other entity in the United States, but I certainly know that it is more than any other entity in Florida. And in 1978, also recognized that Barbara Lee Diamondstein, in a book called Buildings Reborn, which people still read today, recognized Flagler College for its efforts to preserve the Hotel Ponce de Leon. Here are the men who came together. They never completely worked together as a team after this, but this was their most dramatic and important project. And this again reads from left to right, with the exception that you have a young Henry Flagler, a little bit younger than he would have been at the time that the Ponce was constructed, and then the Flagler picture that's shortly before his death in 1913. Louis Comfort Tiffany, who was at the beginning of his glass-making talents. He had been a painter. He also painted a couple of buildings down here in St. Augustine when he visited. But his stained glass, this was some of the first stained glass he did in the United States, is here at the Ponce. Thomas Edison and the electricity and the steam power plant. First water-driven power in the US, written about in engineering magazines throughout the country. John Mervyn Carrera and Thomas Hastings, that team of architects who had been together in Paris going to college. Maitland Armstrong was also a glass artisan whose family had ties to this part of Florida. He is considered the person that actually did the creation of what we call our clerestory windows. They have a cauldron pattern, probably more than you need to know, but if you come and see pictures of the dining hall, that will make sense to you then. William Hammer and William Kniesche were the two engineers that were responsible for seeing that the building went up and was as carefully constructed as possible. The only reason I put them in particular is Kniesche, at the same time he was supervising the construction here, he was also supervising the construction on the base of the Statue of Liberty. These days that would be no big deal. The architect or engineer would just get on a plane and fly down. Well, in this case, he had to get on a train and ride for more than 24 hours straight to supervise the project in Florida before going back to supervise the project in New York. Bernard Maybach was the roommate with Thomas Hastings. Bernard Maybach's father, Bernhard Maybach, used the old German spelling. He was the chief wood carver for Potier and Steinmetz. Bernard Maybach goes on after his work on the Ponce to become one of California's 5 most important architects, and the Palace of Fine Arts from the Panama Pacific Exposition remains as a tribute to him. McGuire and McDonald were the 2 contractors who had come originally from Canada down through New England, and they were actually the builders who supervised the building. George Willoughby Maynard, the artist that did the murals, Auguste Potier and Steinmetz, again, the interiors firm, and Nathan Frank Barrett, who was responsible for the landscape design. Now we go to our preservation story, because it's really unfair for all of us to present this as if the Flagler College campus with its 19 historic buildings have all looked the way they do now in a high state of preservation. That was certainly not the case. Photograph here after Keenan Hall is rehabilitated. At the time that this became the college campus, that building was condemned. So very little of it was able to be used. As you can see, the Keenan Trust stepped in. The Keenan Trust, William Rand Keenan Jr. was Henry Flagler's brother-in-law and had also made his own fortune as a chemist. And he came in and became the manager of the hotels and really worked with the hotel properties. So his legacy is the Keenan Trust, which also began in 1968. This is the inside of Keenan Hall, gutted. It had a basement. If any of you managed to make it up here where we hang out on the 5th floor, those are faculty offices now on the 5th floor of the building. And all of these, of course, have floors and walls and ceilings, and they are classrooms. The little building here was left over from the Coast Guard, and that's where the art department hung out with 3 of our early art faculty members, Enzo Torcoletti, Robert Hall, and Don Martin, and some art students. Keenan Plaza now, this is the beautifully lit way that the exterior that had been grassy for a long time is a place that students now gather. For a time, the library had been housed in Keenan Hall. That's an early example of what it looked like. And most recently, in order to help recover and be more resilient, and you can see sort of the outside of the building, we got an appropriation from the state of Florida for resilience planning and went in, and we now have more hurricane resistant glass windows in and did a more improved roof structure there. Markland, as I stated, was the other property immediately west of the Hotel Ponce de Leon. That was the other original piece of the campus. Began originally as the president's residence. This is an old photograph of it from probably the early 1970s. This is a side view. So there's your front, here's the side of what it looks like now. It is behind our student center these days. change in logo up here. Behind Markland House is a little tiny building called the Billiard Building, or what we renamed Markland Cottage. It is our archaeology center now. It is the tiniest building on the campus. It is really one room, but it is incredibly elaborate. It is where Dr. Anderson and Henry Flagler and their friends played billiards. This is the interior of that building after being meticulously rehabilitated and restored. And when we all reopen fully, I hope you will take an opportunity to go and say hello to the Florida Public Archaeology Network staff housed in there. Markland House itself, I'm showing you, it was added to. So an original side had the ladies' parlor. There is Mr. Flagler's portrait, and there's one over here of Mr. Anderson, Dr. Anderson, and then the dining room set. We use this for an event venue, these days a little bit of a classroom, and then the upstairs are used for faculty and staff offices. Again, it's really appropriate to tell you our full story. So College Library, beginning in 1971, was that grand parlor because we needed to find a big space, had not yet rehabilitated Keenan Hall. So we have these attractive fluorescent tube lights being suspended on either side of chandeliers. And yes, I gave you a little sarcasm there. And our students studying under our particularly significant and famous art collection. Here's the murals in the center of the room being repainted, the canvas murals that had delaminated and had fallen and come apart on the floor being recreated. And this is a la 2013, the way the Flagler room looks now. And we use that again for events and celebrations in general. And that has a collection of furnishings and memorabilia and antiques that are representative of the entire hotel period and the history of Flagler College too. Our dining hall. This image here is the achievement, the success. This is 2015 when we are hosting the King and Queen of Spain for St. Augustine's 450th anniversary. This is King Philippe VI of Spain, and there are about 300 dignitaries sitting throughout the room. To be able to achieve that and become a place that really has been toured and used by dignitaries, presidents, and Flagler College, we had to go through some pretty significant steps. Here are some before shots of the damage to the paint. The stained glass windows were all removed and restored and put back in place. This is some of the work being done meticulously by the artisans from throughout Europe, by the way, who came. International Fine Arts Conservation Studio has been our conservation team for 35 years. This is Dr. Proctor touring Jeb Bush, who went on to become our governor, to see the dining room and talk about the preservation components. And above this are executives with Barnett Bank, which was our last independent bank in Florida. It's now part of Bank of America, as they were doing the first fundraising campaign to put this room back together and have it fully restored. A very successful $2 million campaign. Again, from the lawn, as you can see, Keenan Hall, we go to the smokestack that identifies the Edison Boiler Building and the adjacent artist studios. This is one of the only examples of an industrial building from the Flagler era anywhere, which made it significant also in its relationship to Edison. Since we have modern steam heat and more modern electric heat these days, that is not needed. So the building had been used for storage for a long time. It wasn't particularly attractive. We put together a fundraising campaign, raised $5.5 million, including 2 grants from the state of Florida, and showcased the fact that you had nationally known artists who began many of their careers here as they were painting during the winters to entertain people in St. Augustine, tourist visitors, and Henry Flagler's guests at his hotels. Martin Johnson Heed is the most famous. The Heed Studio is here at the end. It has been preserved intact and used for a variety of art purposes these days, but looks pretty similar to the way it did when he would have painted giant magnolias on a blue velvet cloth. A number of his paintings are now at the National Gallery in private collections or in the White House. The boiler building that you can see, we were able to put a floor in, keep the beams, the structural beams that were up here, put 2 levels in, and those are painting studios. At the top of the building, under the major dome in the center between the 2 towers, is a space called the Solarium. It was the college's first library, a place to hang out, sort of like a student center function, in that there wouldn't have been one otherwise. After some code issues, it had to be less used, and so 1971 is when the library was moved into the Flagler room. The building was used for sort of dead storage, and that just means places that you don't actively move things around. So let's say the first time I saw it, there were lots of bicycles and furniture that wasn't needed, and they were kept up there. Well, in 2004, Charlie, Francis, Ivan, and Jean, 4 hurricanes ravaged Florida, and Francis and Jean required Flagler College to evacuate students and personnel, but also blew in the sliding glass wall that you see pictured better here. And this is it with damage, and took off much of the roof and lost plaster. And so this is a section of that. The college needed to focus on the repairs that related directly to students. And so a space that was not actively being used was not at the top of the list. But by the time we get a few years later, in 2008, the state is going to celebrate the 500th anniversary of Ponce de Leon, and the city is getting ready to celebrate the 450th of its founding. And it's time to finish the preservation of the hotel. So we fast forward $2 million later, during a global recession, very successful campaign, we host the King and Queen of Spain. Here again is King Philippe. Here is Queen Letizia. Dignitaries from Spain, 60 people here, about 30 Americans, 30 Spaniards, US senators, military leaders, Father Tom Willis from the Cathedral Basilica, Consul General from Miami. So a great celebration. And the campus has needed to expand over the years. And so we have done new construction that is very complementary and has received awards as well for being good, what is called infill construction. So we have our student center that was finished in 2007. We have the Proctor Library that again was to honor Dr. Proctor's 25th year. If you have not been inside the library and you are a student, a parent, or otherwise a guest, this is what the lobby looks like. Old-fashioned, classic library lobby. So it's beautiful, decorative. We've had events and celebrations there, and some of our art collection is also housed in that space. And the student center interior is very contemporary. There are classrooms, there's a cafe, places where the students can hang out, exercise, do all sorts of stuff. In between, we have a house that was actually built about 1870, moved to this site, updated with a Mediterranean revival, complete redo in the 1920s, lived in, and then suffered some damage from hurricanes late in its life, but owned by Dr. Robert Ellert and his wife, Dr. Joanne Crisp Ellert. Neither one of them had direct heirs. They both enjoyed the fact that they lived across the street from the college, so they donated the house, and in return, at Dr. Ellert's request after his wife passed, that we built the Crisp Ellert Art Museum to honor her. This is now our alumni house. So we have a historic building that's gone through a couple of iterations too. Now, some of these, I hope everyone appreciates, because they're some of the most dramatic pictures that I was able to locate on campus. Building services, where our financial arm is, and students pay their room, board, etc. That is what this building looked like as it was undergoing rehabilitation. in the 1980s. Half a block down, we have what is now called Wiley Hall, and that's an interior shot of Wiley Hall in the 1980s. So each of them looks considerably better than they did at the time. The little power plant for Wiley Hall is an adorable little building built out of coquina with a Greek temple form entrance, originally just a little square that has a coquina fireplace in it. And we call it now the Palm Cottage. And it was the power plant, and that's where the steam heat was derived that powered this building next door. So it's been added to over time. Currently, it is the headquarters for our honors program. Between and around all of this is Lewis House, named for Lawrence Lewis Jr., as the first separate men's residence hall. And that is still a residence hall for students today. And then again, along the same block, and we are immediately north of the Hotel Ponce de Leon, we had what was called a Ponce de Leon cottage. There were two of them originally, and if you did not want to be in the Hotel Ponce de Leon, but brought your entire family or needed more space or just wanted more privacy, you could rent one of these two cottages. That is part of the college property. It was picked up and moved forward so that we could achieve some additional parking behind it. And that is what the building looks like today. Has a little more Victorian paint scheme than what it had when the college acquired it. And this is a little more original than that. Also, some additional buildings here. As you can see, we have added to our campus. This is Cedar Hall. Again, very similar, and it has a mix of what would be brick colored and concrete colored, or what is referred to as polychromatic, multicolored use. This is today co-ed dorm built as our second men's residence hall, and it is about a block from the campus. Near Memorial Presbyterian Church, which is the church Henry Flagler built to honor his daughter, and immediately that which is also immediately across the street from the Hotel Ponce de Leon, we have the Hollingsworth House. Hollingsworth was one of two significant architects in St. Augustine in the 20th century. He designed a number of buildings, but particularly in light of this presentation, he designed the Florida East Coast Railway trio of buildings that I showed you at the beginning. This was his personal residence. The college has used it for faculty, visiting faculty, special guests, and continues to use it as a residence. The Williams House here on the left, again, about a block from the campus, just a little bit further west than Markland House. It's faculty and staff offices and has actually been changed very little other than we closed in a porch to make more space. And then we have some other small buildings down here. We have Tinland Hall, which is the Tinland Cottage, which is our counseling center. Institutional advancement is down near the FEC Railroad buildings. And we have a little tiny bungalow that we use as our Human Resources Center. Lewis Auditorium was a major step in the college's growth. It was built, as you can see by the date at the bottom, 30 years ago this year through a gift of $4 million from Lawrence Lewis Jr. It is the city's only auditorium at this point, so it has hosted a number of dignitaries for the public. As far as I know, the largest attendance is when Jacques Cousteau came to speak, and people lined up for hours to be ready to go in and enjoy listening to him. This is the building under construction, so you can see as the walls are going up, and once again, it follows that Spanish influence polychromatic theme. It was renamed after Lawrence Lewis and his wife, Janet Patton Lewis, and the college did some upgrades on that to be prepared for the city's 450th anniversary. Some of our famous guests over here on the left, this was Secretary Ken Salazar, who flew in from Washington, D.C. to announce the formation of a presidential commission to help celebrate St. Augustine's 450th anniversary. That was actually done in July at 10 o'clock in the morning. And the only reason I bring that up is that he thought he would be speaking to about 50 people. He couldn't imagine that at 10 a.m. anyone was going to care to hear him speak. And we had standing room only at our 800 plus capacity auditorium. So he was quite impressed. Senator Bill Nelson, Congressman John Mica, Florida Secretary of State Ken, oh shoot, sorry, and I've forgotten his name. But they were also guests here as well. If you pay attention to novels and writing and or even movies over the last several years, you will probably recognize author Pat Conroy. Pat Conroy came to St. Augustine for his first visit as a favor to a friend of his. He spoke in the auditorium. He stayed at the Casa Monica. People loved it. He stayed and signed books for an hour and a half after his presentation. And then he went back to the Casa Monica and stayed up with people for hours, regaling them with stories. He came back a few years later and did a fundraiser for our Writers in Residence program that operates to the English department. So he passed away recently. We are very grateful that he shared part of the last chapter of his very colorful and entertaining life with us here in St. Augustine. And speaking of colorful and entertaining, Carl Hiaasen has been irreverently telling stories that are more truth than fiction about Florida for 30 years or so. He began as a writer with the Miami Herald. He recently just announced that he is retiring from that, but in between he has written more than 24 books about Florida, several of which have been made into movies. Very funny, very irreverent. You have to have a sense of humor, but he really seems to understand the flaws, the fallacies, the eccentricities, and the reason why we all live here. And he was one of the literary legends that was invited to come to St. Augustine. So he presented in the auditorium as well. Last but not least, Cokie Roberts, who began as a journalist, became an author, served on the National Archives Board, and again, unfortunately, passed away recently of breast cancer. But she came as part of a history education national conference that we hosted in 2015. Her only visit to St. Augustine, she thoroughly enjoyed it. She had no idea what she had been missing. So it was really nice to have her here as well too. We don't want to forget athletics, especially this year when our men's basketball team did well and our women's soccer team is looking pretty good, amongst others. So we have our sports centers, our gymnasium, tennis center, athletic fields here. Little story about David Drysdale. Drysdale Field honors his father. His father was a friend with Lawrence Lewis and mentored him. And David's son is on the baseball team. But the Drysdale family has been very supportive of the college and very invested. And part of the reason I single him out in a positive sense is he has a true and sincere interest in the history of St. Augustine and the college. And he's been very invaluable in supporting the research that a number of us have done in the community. Hankey Hall. Colonel G.F. Robert Hankey is one of Henry Flagler's 3 great-grandsons. You can see Flagler had a son who grew to maturity. His daughter, I've already noted, was honored by Memorial Presbyterian Church. She passed away from complications of childbirth, and another daughter passed away at age 3. So Harry Harkness Flagler, Henry Flagler's son. Harry has 3 daughters, so hence the Flagler name does not continue through that line. Colonel Hankey is one of those great-grandsons, and he provided the lead gift for our admissions building, which is Hankey Hall immediately to the east. of the Hotel Ponce de Leon, has a beautiful courtyard, and thanks to our art students, a terrific skyline fountain. The other part I will tell you about this is that the college received an award for this, in that you may or may not have noticed through the pictures, but certainly would if you took a tour of the campus, that we generally do not have what most Floridians have, which are retention ponds or mosquito breeding grounds. We do everything through exfiltration. The water that comes off the roofs of the buildings runs and waters the gardens and powers the fountains. And in case you were wondering what we used to build a new building, we took away a surface parking lot to do that. Another new building done recently, Pollard Hall, recognizes another relative of Henry Flagler's. This is a complex of 3 buildings, interconnected, joined together, and featuring 2 gardens. And again, the water runs through, so that has received a new construction award and has been recognized for its energy efficiency as well. And then this is a little interior shot, it has a little nook that we took from paying homage to some of the spaces in the Ponce. We've also added a couple, an infill building and a historic building that were required to provide a radio station and faculty offices. And now we're down to the other end of the campus and the Florida East Coast Railway. There's the general office buildings again, 2 of the 3 of those, and Aber Hall. And certainly as a residence hall, it is not open to the public, but a photograph here lets you see it has marble wainscoting, marble floors. It, by the way, has brass elevator doors and a marble staircase. So it still retains those original features from when it was the railroad's national headquarters, but has been adapted to use as student rooms. So they have terrific views out of those. And this is a summary of some of the recognitions that Flagler College has received. But I also want to do a plug for a way that you can learn even more and celebrate my students in that I had in 2 classes as we were getting prepared to celebrate the 50th anniversary of the college in 2018. We created an audio tour app, phone tour. Florida Stories operates through the Florida Humanities Council and the state of Florida. They created the umbrella phone app that has 30 tours on it throughout the state of Florida, but you can download it for free. And the Flagler College tour is the most fully accessible. If you cannot hear the audio, you can read the descriptions and enjoy the images. If you are sight impaired, you can listen to the entire tour. It's a walking tour that you can do that covers 2 miles, and we tell you about how far you are all the way along. But the beauty of it is, if you don't visit here, if you have no intention of visiting here, if you just want to learn more, you can download it. Then you do not need the internet anymore, and you can read and enjoy the music and the narrative and the tour and get much more detail than I have time to give you through this tour. It's been terrific. I use it in my classes. I encourage everyone to do that. It is truly enjoyable. And with that, I'll close with what we have here again is some of the celebrations of the recognitions that the college has received. And I'll also put in that people ask me if I think that the students really appreciate where they go to school. And I say yes. I take all of my students, from first-year students through my historic preservation class, on tours of the campus. And some of them, when I tell them that we're going to take a tour of the campus, they kind of roll their eyes like, well, okay, we live here and we see it. So I try to be really sure that I give them little details that they might not have heard on an admissions tour or learned by living in the residence halls, to really let them see what an extraordinary place their campus is, how remarkable and unique, and how fortunate they are to be able to study, learn, experience, share, grow, become themselves in this remarkable and nurturing environment. They gain a deeper awareness. They bring their family members to campus. They're very proud of this. And part of that is a testimony to them also giving back to the campus through their time, their talents, and their tithes. So here again is a summary of the recognitions. I hope you enjoy some of that. You can see some of our famous friends who have been here, including Mark Twain, President Roosevelt, and I was a little bit ornery in that it was President Theodore Roosevelt in 1905, but future president and his cousin, Franklin Delano Roosevelt, came as a college student on spring break in 1904. So Martin Luther King Jr., Zora Neale Hurston, but literally dozens of famous people have been here. As you can see, from the most world's luxurious resort to one of the world's most beautiful campuses. I thank Stephen Brooke for the photographs. He's an extraordinary architectural photographer. And here's the team of us. And this is to promote Flagler's Legacy Shop. I hope you will, if you have an interest, consider going online and purchasing both books. As I fondly tell my friends and family, they are not spy novels. So no, this is not my retirement plan, but I thoroughly enjoyed doing the research and learning and writing and working with Tom Graham on the writing and working with Stephen on the photographs and my dear friend, Stacy Sather, the design artist and the layout. And that is it. And thank you all very much.